be preserved under the providence of God for the happiness of mankind.
The trouble is caused by unthinking people who carelessly throw away ageless ideals as if they were old and outworn machines.
But it is the values of individual liberty, equality before the law and the supremacy of people over the state to which we can always with confidence return as a powerful and uniting force.
Australia is not a secular country. It is a free country.
G'day and welcome to Pellowe Talk. We're doing a bit of a new experiment. We're going to try to be doing a show every Monday morning. It might be Tuesdays for the rest of the year. As we get close to the election, it's an incredibly busy time, and the preparation and other duties that we've got are huge. The preparation time isn't so great. So forgive us if we're a little bit rough with our transitions and technology so far. But today I'm joined by two gentlemen who are first-timers on The Good Source. So welcome to Reverend Matthew Littlefield.
Hey Dave, how you doing?
You look like you're worried about your earpiece not falling out.
Yeah, it's just about to come out.
And I've also got Dylan Oakley here. Welcome, Dylan.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
Now, your show is, what is it called? Base
Christian History.
Base Christian History. If you're looking for Matt online, elsewhere, look up his YouTube channel, Base Christian History. He's a reverend in the Baptist Church.
That's correct.
In Southeast Queensland. And your page, getting a few likes and followers now on Facebook, is Freedom Has a Voice. Are you on other socials as well?
No, I'm not. I'm actually new to social media, Dave. So, tackling Facebook is enough for me right now.
Yeah,
but
awesome.
Freedom Has a Voice for now.
So the format we're going to try and work with in this new show is, and it's not really a new show, it's just a format in a season, temporary thing we're doing on Pellowe Talk. And that is that I'm going to have guests on and we're going to try and contribute a thought each and then discuss it together. So we'll have a little bit of conversation that follows somebody's thinking out loud. Now, Matt, you're actually quite a historian or quite studied in history. And what other areas have you done a lot of study and reading and research in?
Well, I love history. It's more a hobby than a profession, but it's directly related to what I do. I mean, the scriptures is largely a book of history and God's work in history. But I've got degrees in theology as a pastor, obviously. Yep. That's why I have degrees in theology. That's my formal area of study. But at every point that I have been able to, I've also focused on history. Yep. in that space as well.
Yep. And what about the geopolitics? Where does because you're quite knowledgeable about that, is that largely from your studies of world history, or are you otherwise enjoying that as a hobby further as well?
I like to keep myself plugged into what's happening in the world. When I was younger, I was always a big fan of ancient history, and I kind of thought modern history was boring. Yep. And I thought, all the good stuff's happened a long time ago. But then I started to realize that's completely wrong. There's a lot of fascinating ancient history, but there's a lot of fascinating modern history. And so, everything that happened yesterday and before is history. Yeah. And so if you want to understand the world in which you live, you've got to stay plugged in. I'm not an expert in modern history in any way, and I wouldn't pretend to be. Yep. But I like to keep plugged into what is happening, understand how we got to where we are. And that really comes down to, because I'm a pastor, we have to understand the world and why the world is the way it is. And what we have to do as Christians is apply the word of God to changing the aspects of the world that we are part of. And that's just simply obedience to God. We've got to be transformed by the renewing of our mind and not be conformed to the messages of this world. And to do that, we have to understand what the world is doing, why it's saying what it is, how we got to where we are, and how we can do what God wants us to do.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, what I'm going to need from you guys is some interaction and some feedback. We will be putting your comments on as we have our discussion and maybe engaging with you a little bit as well. And we also need you to share this video and get as many people watching it as possible. The only way to combat the lying harlot media is to dilute them and get the honest, truthful, non-euphemistic conversations out there as much as possible. We're going to be talking about the Ukraine today. We're going to be talking about Roe v. Wade, that famous decision from the Supreme Court of the United States nearly 50 years ago, which said the The right to privacy, or the imagined right to privacy in the US Constitution, gave an imagined right for mothers to kill their children. And we're also going to be talking about how to hold the major party MPs to account here in Australia at this federal election, who are really jellyfish, just complete spineless drifters on the topics which matter to us the most. They're completely adrift from any value statements in their parties or even the Constitution, and people that we really should not be supporting, because they're little more than stuffed shirts in warming seats in Parliament and not serving us for their purpose at all. I'm already starting to sermonise on that one, but Dylan will be leading us on that. Stay tuned, because there's going to be some great video that he captured of an MP, a LNP MP, just really revealing the kind of record and performance that does not deserve to be rewarded with continued presence in our Parliament. And that's about the nicest way that I can say that. So stay tuned for that. That'll be our third topic. But right now, Matt, let's basically hear from you, your thoughts on the Ukraine.
Okay. So there has been a divide over the last couple of months between conservatives and right-wingers who clearly see through the nonsense of the COVID years, but are now at loggerheads over Ukraine. There is no need to explain the divide, because people are pretty much aware of the differences. I want to contend that it is not so much a difference over principles, but simply a difference of lens that is causing this divide. On the one side, you have people who are completely against autocracy, dictatorships, and the crushing of national sovereignty. And on the other side, you have people who are completely against the crushing of national sovereignty, overriding the will of the peoples, and the destruction of liberty. In other words, you have conservatives and right-wingers essentially holding the same principles, but coming to a very different conclusion about the war. Those who see Putin as the embodiment of tyrannical evil correctly observe that he is a dictator, that the democracy of Russia is likely not really genuine, and that Putin leads in an autocratic way. Because they see this as inherently evil, and because they believe that Western liberal democracy is superior, they are already poised to see his invasion of Ukraine as the autocratic bully enforcing his will on the smaller, plucky but defiant Ukraine. So they view the war through the lens of a dictator and bully crushing a small sovereign state. Those who do not see Putin as the embodiment of evil also recognize that he is a dictator and an oligarch, to be precise, that democracy is likely not genuine in Russia, and that Putin leads in an autocratic way. The reason this does not concern us is because Russia has never been a successful democracy. Democracy is not the Russian way. Democracy was the cry of the revolutionaries who tore down Tsarist Russia and set up the Soviet Union. It was a tactic, not a principle in Russia. We know that Russia is not like us politically, and don't really think it needs to be. Democracy is just one form of government which has recently been the most successful, but other forms of government are every bit as biblically valid. So the fact that Putin is an autocrat doesn't offend us. Russia does things differently. When you couple this with the fact that Russia is not fighting just Ukraine, but the US empire in Ukraine, you can see that Russia is fighting against an even larger autocracy that smashes its way around the world, bending nations to its will if they will not submit. So we view the war through the lens that Putin has punched the global empire in the nose, and those of us who believe empire is inherently wicked are okay with this. We don't like war, but recognize that empire provokes war. We needed to see globalism to start losing. Trump scared it, but it reined him in and kicked him back out of power. But having a genuine challenge which weakens the hold of the global elite is good for the sovereignty of nations going forward. This doesn't mean that we see Putin as an ally or a friend. He is the ally and friend of Russia. He is doing what he believes is best for Russia. And we here want leaders who say no to globalist powers and prioritize their own people. Leaders who will say no to trade agreements destroying their industry, like the Lima Agreement, or treaties like the Paris Agreement, which destroy our ability to make and produce cheap and reliable energy for homes, cars, and industry. Putin may not be our guy, but he has shown that the global empire can be stood up to. We want our leaders to stand up to it and say no to their sovereignty-crushing treaties and agreements. This is why people with the same basic principles can come to such different conclusions about the same matter. We lament the Ukrainian people are caught up in this, but Russia did not encroach on the US empire. The US empire encroached on Russia. They initiated this conflict with non-stop aggression. Don't you wish Don't you wish our governments would stop invading other nations and truly focus on their own people instead of globalist movements and agendas?
I do agree, probably starting with that last sentiment, that we would stop interfering in other nations. And part of that is we are such a corrupt, no, maybe not corrupt, maybe corrupt is exactly the right word, but I don't want to overstate it. So let me just say low quality democracy. When you've seen the behavior of police in Victoria, especially the Victorian police, there has been just such brutality and unjustifiable violence against unarmed citizens protesting abuse of government that for us to be moralizing and sermonizing against a foreign tyrant is just the pinnacle of hypocrisy. And so my position, I guess I want to articulate, should we care about other nations to the point of intervention in a separate thought? But my first thought is we're not there yet. I think Jesus said judgment of other people is fantastic, but you have to be prepared to be judged by the same standard that you judge other people with. And so you hypocrite, get the beam out of your own eyes before you try and help other people with the splinters in their eyes. And I think that's where we are. We have so stuffed up foreign interference and domestic justice for recent decades and weeks that for us to say we want to help Putin with his low quality democracy and justice, we're not qualified to be helping him yet.
Absolutely. I mean, we've got a lot here to get our house in order. Our house is out of order, and things seem to be a little bit calmer right now. But one of the big problems with what's happening is just blatant hypocrisy of the West. I remember reading recently that China moving into the Solomon Islands was a red line for Australia. I mean, last I checked, went about 1,000 miles away from the Solomons, and yet people condemn Russia, saying that NATO moving into Ukraine is a red line. None of us like war. None of us like war. But one of the big problems we have is the West acts with an arrogant hypocrisy on the world stage, and people are noticing it. I remember years ago, I was an ardent Western advocate. I believed that we were really trying to set up democracy in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. It's laughable to think about that now. But more people are waking up to the fact that we're not as good on the world stage as we said we were. And to your point, which is precisely correct, we're not as good on the domestic stage as we pretend to be. About a year ago, people were locked in their homes, locked in their streets. They weren't allowed to go more than a few miles from home. And now the media is trying to scare us about that happening in China. Like, we haven't gone through it ourselves. Like, are they the bad guys for doing that? You saw what happened in Victoria during the lockdowns. There's just so many issues with this.
And I think what's happened is that we've had the media come, and our governments are the same position, teach us what position to have on the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And I get tired of seeing these headlines that say the Russia-Ukraine conflict, everything you need to know, So we're going to find out right now everything we need to know about this. And I think for a lot of people, there is now a healthy cynicism about what the media get into concert and tell us what we should believe. It's almost like a red flag if we go straight from a COVID narrative that was being very much one-sided through the media, and people have woken up to that, so to speak, and then they're told to now move on to this new narrative and believe it 100% without question. It's almost like this is something we need to investigate. This is something we need to ask questions about. And you're right, we need to look at the NATO build-up along that Russia-Ukraine border over years. We need to look at the instability in the Ukraine. There's that principle of the Nazification in that population there that would have been of concern to Russia. And if we were balanced about it, if it was on the Mexico-US border that Russia was building up some kind of forces, how would the US respond? So I think we need to be balanced about these things. And it's one of the things that we'll come to later when we talk about my conversation with Bert Van Manen, an LNP federal member. And I said, to him, it's disingenuous. Australians on the street are feeling like this. Why are we able to, as a nation, be so responsive to a conflict overseas? I mean, we can send hundreds of millions of dollars for the Ukrainians to buy weapons and take a position here. We can put sanctions on Russia. We can do all these things, but we can't help people like me who have lost my job because of exercising my bodily autonomy, something I never thought.
No, not because of exercising your bodily autonomy, because of a tyrannical state premier.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's a rogue ALP state government.
Losing your job is not a natural consequence of declining an offered medical procedure. Losing your job in the way you have is a consequence of tyrannical abuse over government. 100%. And that is 100% something your local federal member should be at the very least speaking about. Even if we believed all of their propaganda about being powerless because of the Constitution, which is absolute rubbish, it was, at the very least, they should be railing against that tyranny and saying, forget what's going on in the Ukraine. We have people being oppressed right here in my electorate, and I'm going to speak up for them. I'm going to speak out for their rights and freedoms. Wouldn't that be novel?
Well, the word is solidarity. We just want to see these politicians show solidarity. And I said that directly to Bert. I said the correct answer, rather than blaming a virus, which is what the government tend to do, even if you had blamed the state government and railed against them, as you said, and said, they've done the wrong thing, we wish we could change, etc. That would have been better than immediately just blaming a virus. Because, I mean, a virus, there's a public health emergency if we want to accept that it was that at some stage. The government has the right and should have a response, but they must get the balance right between a public health response and individual freedoms. They got that wrong, so wrong, and they've got to admit that.
Let's come back to the virus, but your point obviously is focusing on the Ukraine is hypocritical because of the failures to defend justice right here at home.
And force feeding us a narrative about what we are to believe and what we are to think about the Russia-Ukraine conflict is something that we have learned not to do, it's particularly over the last 2 years.
So, Matthew Littlefield, what has the mainstream media told us about the Russia-Ukraine conflict? What's the prevailing understanding which is wrong? What's the misinformation that you can correct? Because, I mean, frankly, I haven't looked into it, and I haven't listened to a lot of mainstream media, but my bottom line thought is Putin should stay on his side of the fence.
Yeah, so there's a lot to answer that question, but I guess one of just to break it down to its basic constituent parts, the media has basically been saying that the great dictator is rampaging across Eastern Europe, and it's our job to defend democracy. And in defending a democracy which banned political parties that opposed the government, which is Ukraine, not Russia. That happened in Ukraine.
So I think I understand this bit. I think I've heard this before. Essentially, Ukraine banned pro-Russian political parties because part of, well, essentially, there's this conflict in regions that once were part of Russia, and whatever, maybe Russia's put citizens in there that are Russian speaking and want to agitate and infiltrate to be part of Russia. But in response to that perceived threat, the Ukraine actually banned those people and provinces having that representative voice.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. It's actually fascinating to see how we can actually, with a straight face, say we're defending a traditional democracy. Yeah. It's ridiculous. Yeah. But getting back to sort of answer this, but getting back to the main point in my editorial at the start, I've got many friends on the conservative or the right-wing side of the political divide who are like, Matt, you were so consistent against standing against tyranny on COVID. Why aren't you standing against the tyrant Putin? And my simple answer to that is I'm continuing to stand against tyranny. I'm continuing to stand against the same global empire that was behind that tyranny we just experienced and is behind the encroachment in Eastern Europe. I believe it was said by one of the leaders of NATO, one of the early leaders of NATO, or one of the American presidents. I can't remember the name of exactly who said it, but they weren't going to move 1 inch after the 1990 post-Soviet era borders towards the east.
It's a long broken promise.
It's an incredibly incredibly obvious broken promise. But that global empire has been moving further and further east. Now, we just saw what that empire did to our own way of life.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying I'm on Putin's side. As I said in my editorial, Putin's not our ally. He's not our friend. He's Russia's ally and he's Russia's friend. And what I want, and it's just very basic, very simple. I want our leaders to be our allies and our friends.
That's right.
That's what we should have. That's my point.
Yeah.
And so I am standing against tyranny, and I believe it's a consistent tyranny.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, getting into the exact, as I said, I'm not an expert, getting into the exact geopolitical structures of the Ukrainian government and the Russian government, that's a very complicated discussion. Yeah. And I'm not the best person to get into those details, but what I do want to see very clearly is our leaders stop supporting globalist movements that destroy sovereignty and freedom. And that's what's happening in Eastern Europe.
Yep.
Now, they will present it in the exact opposite. We're fighting for democracy.
Yeah.
Remember when people thought we were fighting for democracy in the Middle East? Do you remember that? Do you remember thinking that and now realizing how silly that idea was?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, look, I think you're spot on with your point that you crystallised there, because it is a case that even watching this, it seems like Putin has got himself offside with the globalists. I believe he was a WEF member himself, or a young part of the forum himself. And at one point there, I noticed that they'd taken his bio off the World Economic Forum website, and people had drawn attention to that. So there was this question mark: has he really put these guys offside? Is he really out of step? Is he really upset them? Then there are others that said, well, wait a minute, it's all part of a greater agenda again. But the theme that I keep coming back to, don't mind if I bring a little prop out here, Dave, again, this is my spanner I've been taking around at different places. But even if Putin right now is throwing a spanner in the works of a globalist agenda, I think a lot of people would not be upset to see that happen, because it seems like, and I listened to Senator Alex Antic recently talk about this, that a lot of parliaments, a lot of governments seem to be marching to the beat of a globalist drum. That our own parliament is full of people who are members of the World Economic Forum, and we need to have transparency and accountability around that. But I did also want to add too, because I know people who have family that are in the Ukraine, etc., and war is a friend to nobody, and you mentioned that at the start. And tragically, we see a lot of loss of life and disruption and pain that I don't wish on anybody. So there's no real winners in a war. But we do have, I think the media have treated us like idiots in many ways, and tell us how to think and lower it down to who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. And people are, the awakening is not just at the moment around the political spectrum and people getting out and learning how to vote, but even these bigger issues, Dave. I think people are starting to turn off the football, put the hedge trimmers away, and start to learn and get a little bit more knowledge around some of the things that are happening in the world and be more informed.
Yep. And that's really, I guess, something that I want to see Australians do is get better engaged, better informed, turn off the mainstream media, and like you said, I use a metaphor of, when you come to election time, there's more important things to do than mow your lawn.
But Dave, you were mowing your lawn on Saturday when I called you.
I'm not saying don't mow your lawn. What I'm saying is Christians in particular can be making excuses about why we don't get involved in politics. And it's this simple. Now, I've been involved in politics for a long time, helping campaign. And so I've seen firsthand the number of Christians who do not help and do not turn up, and then on Sunday pray for righteous government the day after the vote happened. Now, every single one of us have to turn up. And whether you do it for the Christian motivation of love of neighbor, or whether you do it for the patriotic motivation of love of nation, you have to turn up on Saturday and vote. So why not contact the candidate that you intend on giving your first vote to, your primary preference? Why don't you contact them and say, hey, I'll stick around for 2 hours, the lawn can wait, and I will help more people who haven't done the research that I've done vote for you, because I think you're the right person. I would rather they followed my research rather than somebody else's, because I've done it diligently and carefully, and I think you're the best guy for the job, so I'm going to help other people. Now, my daughter did this in the 2016 election, and she was not registered to vote. So don't tell me you not being registered to vote is an excuse. She was short, shy, female. You think of an excuse, and she's probably got 7 of them. And yet she volunteered not for 2 hours, but all day long. And it wasn't for love of nation at her young age. It was for love of father and love of lollies. And yet she was able to probably have influence over, and I'm trying to be conservative and not exaggerate, but maybe she helped 20 people change their vote that day and vote for a better. So that's really the why I use that metaphor about your lawn's not that important, is essentially
priorities.
Take 2 hours and be part of this election. Don't just vote. Don't just rave on Facebook where it's all safe. Actually get into the trenches and make a difference. Your donations and scrutineering. There's so many ways you can be a part of making sure the election is having a good and righteous outcome for the love of your neighbour or the love of your nation. Let's move to the topic of abortion. Our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has recently been asked about the policy settings here in Australia because the Supreme Court of the United States of America has leaked a document saying that they are about to overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, for those who don't know, Jane Roe was a plaintiff, somebody who was used by the abortion industry in America to get a legal decision, a precedent which basically said that the Constitution stopped the states from prohibiting abortion, effectively legalizing it throughout America. Something like 63 million Americans have been killed in the nearly 50 years since that decision. But the Supreme Court is about to overturn that and say those justices had so much wrong with their decision. It was really, really, really bad law. And so abortion has been a huge topic in social media and mainstream media in recent days since that was leaked. Scott Morrison was asked about that. And as a allegedly conservative, allegedly Christian, allegedly Prime Minister, he basically said that he believes the policy settings in Australia are right and don't need touching. Whatever his motivations for saying that, it was a reprehensibly vile and evil thing to say. Without needing to change anything, he again squibbed the opportunity to lead the conversation. And after having heard 2 years of these kind of leaders defer all personal judgment and values to the experts and to science, the very least Scott Morrison could have done is quote the science and say that 96% of biologists agree that every human life begins at conception. This is a scientific fact. This isn't disputable. This isn't debatable unless you want to bring in all kinds of philosophical gymnastics, which are inappropriate in a scientific conversation, because there's no disputing the fact that human life begins at conception. And so you're seeing lots of arguments going on the internet at the moment. And there's a particular meme going around listing a whole bunch of women's names and talking about their particular hypothetical stories on why they needed to kill their babies. And I'm going to actually prepare a dedicated standalone video for that. And that's shareable with or postable. So you can grab the Rumble or YouTube clip and share it beneath anybody sharing this meme, because it's utterly ridiculous. The first line in the Facebook post that's going around says, "I am not pro murdering babies," and then it spends the rest of the text and rhetoric that they've used to justify why it's okay to kill babies in certain circumstances. So that's the first thing to call out. Now, here's the thing to understand about abortion. There ultimately comes 2 reducible positions that a pro-abortionist has. One, they don't know. They genuinely don't know what biology teaches, what all biologists agree. Now, there's been a really great, I've done an interview with somebody who did a PhD level research on the position that biologists have about the beginning of life. And the only people who disagreed with the consensus, with the overwhelming majority that every human life begins at conception, they were people who squibbed the answer because they didn't like the political implications of the inescapable science. And they said things like, well, if human life doesn't begin at conception, when does it begin? They said things like when the teenagers leave home. Just silly things, non-scientific answers. The science is absolutely clear on this. And so the first class of people are people who just need to understand. They're people that are horrified by late-term abortion. Why? Because it looks like a person, because it looks like a baby. It's got a head and arms and feet are clearly distinguishable, and they've seen them at 26 weeks, 24 weeks, 22 weeks, prematurely delivered, and every medical intervention offered to save that life because we know it's sacred at that time. Why? Because it's easy to tell. But science says, before it looks like a person, when it's a fetus, when it's an embryo, when it's a zygote, right at that moment of fertilization, that is a living human being. That's the beginning of a new, unique individual in the human species with life and uniqueness, not part of the mother's body. This is inescapable science. So the first group of person can be helped just by pointing them back. They'll say all kinds of other distractions, but just be drawn back to but when does human life begin? So what you're trying to tell me is it's okay to kill a person sometimes. And the people who don't know when life begins, that's the group of people that you can most easily help by just bringing them back to the science over and over again. If it's not okay in those circumstances that you're detailing, when the person who's inconvenient to have around is 7 years old, well, then it's not okay at any stage. What about when they're 5? What about when they're 3? What about then when they're 1 month old? What about 5 minutes after they're born? Is it okay to kill them then? What's different about them 5 minutes before they're born? And to try and get them to be consistent in their thinking is the first way to answer that question. The second group of people is much harder to deal with, because these are the radical pro-abortionists who do not care. They fully understand that they are taking a human life. They get it, they understand it, and they believe that sometimes it is okay to kill somebody, an innocent living person. And that's something that I can't help. That is a corrupted, seared conscience that only a sovereign intervention by the Holy Spirit to soften their hearts will help. I think it's a break in their psyche, verging on sociopathy. Either of you gentlemen want to weigh in on what you've seen on the internet and the good arguments, the bad arguments, and your thoughts, Matt?
Well, a bad argument is you need a uterus to be able to speak on this issue.
So true.
It's ridiculous. Having a child takes two,
a
father and a mother. And the father and a mother both have a voice. And having a uterus doesn't qualify you to deny it's a life, and you have the right to take life. That's one of the most ridiculous things that people say on this issue, that only women should have an issue. I mean, it's particularly ridiculous to say it in a culture where people cannot define what a woman is. And that's happening more and more. It's blatantly absurd to assert that you need to have a uterus to have an opinion on this. And I know young men who have been hurt by that opinion because they haven't had a say in what's happened to their children. It's
to their own children.
Exactly, to their children. And it is their child. It's their child and their partner's child. So
that's
one of the biggest problems is, this goes to something I wrote about the other day. There's this passage in 2 Peter chapter 1. And Peter's talking to people he's writing to, and he's saying that he's going to continue to remind them of these truths, even though they already know them and they're firmly established. He's going to continue to teach them the same basic truths again and again and again. And this is what, I'm a preacher, I'm a pastor, this is what pastors do. We preach from the Word of God, and we preach the same truths again and again and again. That's what the job of a preacher is. And I've heard people over the years say, so often people who grew up in the church actually say, I don't need to hear preaching so much anymore because I've heard it all before. And they kind of scorn preaching a little bit and think, well, you preach the same things. It's a little bit repetitive. Why do I need to hear it? But just take one look at society, the secular world, where the word of God has been withdrawn from education and so many aspects of society, and look how quickly people forget the basic truths. Like, you don't have the right to take a life just because it gets in the way of your choices and career.
Yep.
There are the government doesn't have absolute authority over every aspect of your life. There are so many basic truths people have forgotten because they haven't been reminded of these basic truths again and again and again. And what it comes down to at the end of the day is people's consciences have been allowed to become seared by a lack of contact with convicting truth. And the truth is, you do not have the right to take a life. And we should celebrate the overturning of Roe versus Wade. And this is not a settled issue, and we should look forward to seeing this issue overturned in our own country.
Yeah. Anne Hughes basically articulates the opinion you were just refuting, we were talking about. And she says, when you have a uterus, you can have an opinion on this. Women must have bodily autonomy. Life begins when it can live outside the mother's body on its own. Maybe we can deal with this bit by bit. Women must have bodily autonomy. I don't disagree. Does anybody disagree?
No, not at all. And
bodily, that's what we've been fighting for all through
bodily
vaccine.
autonomy.
Do you disagree women should have bodily autonomy?
Including the women in the womb and the boys in the womb.
That's what I was going to say. There's bodily autonomy for both. Both humans, the mother and the child. So. Yep. I think what you said at the start, Dave, is true. We have to come back to definitions, and we have to come back to fundamental principles before we then start to. Otherwise, our arguments fall apart as soon as we put them forward.
Yep. Well, Anne also says life begins when it can live outside the mother's body on its own. Interesting fact: 100 years ago, a baby born 4 weeks premature had a very, very low chance of surviving. 8 weeks premature, nearly no chance of surviving. At 32 weeks development, very, very little chance. So according to Anne, scientifically speaking, because a baby born 8 weeks premature 100 years ago had very little chance of surviving, that baby was not actually, in fact, alive while it was in the womb. But we've had medical advancements since then, and we can now easily sustain the life of a child at 32 weeks development outside the womb. So now that baby is alive. 32 weeks development, it is alive scientifically. That's a life. But 100 years ago, that's not a life. So I guess that's chronological discrimination.
Well, there are doctors who can do specialized surgery on congenital conditions inside the womb before the baby is even born. I mean, think of that, the remarkable skill in that, but also the remarkable truth that is pointing to that's a child. Yeah. You might not have heard this word, or you may have heard this word. Have you ever heard of the word homunculus?
No.
Homunculus. I like to.
Is that from Harry Potter?
I have no idea if it's in Harry Potter, but I like to stir my kids sometimes and call them homunculi or homunculuses. I don't know what the plural is actually, but what the word means is a small, tiny human being.
Wow.
That's what the word means. And in fact, that is what people once believed was happening inside the womb. From the very day dot of conception, a small human being was formed, and that small human being grew into a larger human being who was eventually born. In fact, what did they used to say a pregnant mother was? A woman who was with child.
Correct.
With child. And we should bring back that definition of pregnancy. She's with child.
Yeah. So life begins when it can live outside the mother's body on its own, Dylan. That's the scientific definition of life.
Well,
I'm not actually sure that a baby can survive outside the mother's womb on its own. I think it still needs the mother.
Correct. Thanks for that. Yeah, the care straight from day one, and all of the biological needs are met by the mother immediately. Without those, the baby would perish. So,
yeah.
I think there's a lot of pain around this. Again, it's like any topic we discuss.
I just want to keep working through her comments, if that's all right. We'll come back to that. Anne says, my opinion is worthless, and she is unfollowing immediately. I'm terribly sorry I disappointed you, Anne. I will lose a lot of sleep about that, lie awake thinking about, I wonder what Anne is thinking right now. and I'm not sure how I will continue without your sage, scientific, intellectual contributions to a very, very important debate that no man has any right on doing. In fact, when we vote on this in Parliament, we should make sure that all the men abstain and remove themselves from the room for this secret women's business that we make public legislation on. She said. So anyway, yeah, I am devastated. I am devastated by that announcement. Outlaw abortion here, and women will rise up and take to the streets. Yeah, they probably will. I mean, so. We're taking to the streets for a long time about the killing of innocent children. A collection of cells with an electrical charge is not human. What, are you a biologist? It's always men, isn't it, who rape and commit incest and then tell women what to do with the pregnancy. No, I've never committed incest and never raped anybody, Anne. I'm not sure why you would slander me like that. That's something we might take a screenshot of that and just see what the Supreme Court has to say. I'm getting silly. This is the level of debate that these pro-child sacrifice people have. You make me sick. Yeah, pagan demon worship makes me sick too, but it doesn't stop you.
Can I just say something here? The entire history of the women's rights movement has been a consistent argument that women should have a voice on issues which regarded men and women. Women weren't just advocating for women's rights so they could speak about women's issues. In fact, the original suffragettes in the 19th century were actually agitating for the vote so they could get the vote and then vote for the government to ban the opening of saloons to force their husbands to come home from the saloon. That was part of the motivation of the feminist movement.
Curfews.
Yeah, basically. Well, not just curfews. They ended up getting prohibition and banning the saloons completely when the women's movement, women's temperance union allied with the anti-saloon league. And so the idea that men and women don't have a stake in each other's issues is both anti the tradition of women's rights and anti human decency.
Yeah,
we have a say, and we need to be able to have. In fact, in a country like Australia, by definition, we have a right to political speech.
Yeah,
and to be able to give our opinion on this. And it's not just men who are against abortion. I mean, it's just ridiculous to say that men are against abortion. Many women, in fact, most of the women I know consider it to be abhorrent.
Yeah. Well, we have one uterus holder here, Diane Ardrey. She says, I have a uterus, obviously talking to Anne. Abortion is taking a life. Do what you want to your own body, but not the life inside. Now, that is an intellectual, scientific-friendly opinion with the qualification of a uterus to back it up. Thanks, Diane. And obviously, this isn't just men who oppose killing innocent living humans. This is a basic human compassion position to have. I'm so reluctant to try and pronounce your name, but I'm Thelema. I'm going to go with that. Thelema says, the rape and incest fallacy. Less than 1% of abortions are due to rape and incest. Exactly right. Very well put.
Yeah.
If somebody was, I think Ben Shapiro has made this comment well. If you believe in the rape exception, does that mean that abortion should be banned in all other circumstances? And if you say no, then you're not at all sincere about the rape exception.
Yeah. And I think that brings us to the point that for a lot of people, abortion is around a perceived disability or, problem with the child in the womb. And I guess when I've been thinking lately, I've been thinking of, it came to me just in the last couple of days, Nick Vujicic, as a prime example of a man who actually he has a great campaign himself against abortion.
Yeah.
And if you look at Nick Vujicic, he's very disabled. He has no arms, he has no legs. But his platform is called No Limits. He hasn't let that limit him. Now, the good thing about Nick Vujicic, in his case, is that there was never going to be a risk that he would be aborted. He was born into a strong Christian family who had the idea of human life begins at conception. In his case, there was no indication in any scans, or there was no indication that he was going to be born like that.
Yep.
But if you look at his life, Dave and Matt, if you look at this man's life and what he's been able to achieve and the hope he's brought to literally hundreds of millions of people around the world, and consider that had he been in a pregnancy where the parents had seen a scan, who were influenced by this modern idea of killing a human that may be deformed or disabled, he would not be here with us today, and we would lack that soul and that beautiful heart and what he does on the planet. And
totally
I was
right.
talking to you recently about...
It's just horrific that a person would say that a child detected to have no arms and no legs in utero deserves the death penalty. Should be, and they're not that callous about it, like, well, we want to punish them. No, they're actually saying that they should be spared the suffering of a life without arms or legs. But who are you to speak on behalf of that person?
Correct.
All you're doing is extinguishing all hope.
Yeah.
And Nick Wojcik is the perfect example of how incredibly adverse prospects are overcomable. And can be the source of great inspiration and beauty and human contribution.
As a teacher, Nick used to come into schools before he lived in America. He was really welcome in state high schools here in Queensland because he brought so much hope to students there who felt that their lives were unlivable because of their challenges. And then they met this man on stage walking around without arms or legs, telling them to keep smiling, keep the faith. And they'd come and hug him and so, I guess I want to post a video that I used to show a lot of students when I was teaching. It goes for about 10 minutes. It's a 60 minutes interview with Nick from a number of years ago. And we can reflect on this whole abortion issue through that lens as well.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on the abortion topic?
One of the consistent tenets of feminism is the idea that women's voices have been silenced. And people need to be able to hear the voices of women. And there's a very powerful passage in Proverbs 31, verses 8 to 9, which says, "Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy." Who is more in need of someone to speak on their behalf than the unborn child, whose voice is not being heard? No one's is heard less. They need someone to defend them. They need someone to defend them. And we are commanded as believers to defend them, and we should.
Yeah. Dave, if I could just jump in here on that, it reminds me when you're talking, Matt, that when I was teaching leading up to the 2018, I believe it was, election with the Labor government putting on the table the most extreme abortion laws in the world at the time. Horrific. And I was very vocal in the state high school where I was teaching and went around, to different staff rooms and chatted with teachers and had some flyers from Cherish Life and wanted to have a discussion about it. And, even in that context there, I was actually reprimanded. I was called up to the office and told to pull my head in and to stop talking about it. And as you can imagine, I pushed back very hard on that because it's not just a case of free speech being impinged on. However, it was an election issue. I was speaking with adults. I was doing it in a civil discourse, but it's this kind of reaction at the moment, again, and censorship around these issues in relation to life, righteousness, truth, that we have to push back on. And what you saw there, Dave, with that lady wanting to unfollow your page is the reaction that it seems to generate. People, in some cases, get very upset about it.
There is a... look, I think I've gone from a position where I just wanted to talk about the rights of the preborn child, the fetus, the baby, the little person, whatever you want to call it. It's the same thing. It's a living human being full of dignity and human rights. But I moved, I think, to a position with genuine concern for women and child and just carefully articulating that as well. But I think lately I've gone back to the position where we just need to articulate this black and whiteness about the issue. But that doesn't mean that we've lost compassion for the women affected by this. Post-abortion trauma is very real, very life-impacting, and there are hundreds of thousands of women walking with invisible wounds in our society today whose maybe their family knows the wounds. There could be alcohol or drug abuse. There could be career destruction. The self-harming, suicidal ideation. The mental health outcomes for post-abortive women are dramatically worse than the population average. And that's because it is a fracturing of the purpose, design, and image that God put on women as mothers. And it's a complete destruction of their design for them to be involved or a participant in the deliberate destruction of their own children's lives. And my heart breaks for women who have suffered that. And I want to be part of protecting women from that. It's not just about the baby. And so if you are listening to this and you are post-abortive or abortion vulnerable, I want you to seek help. I want you to feel like you have genuine choices available to you. Yes, I will advocate for just laws and right policies and a full and honest understanding of exactly what is happening in this issue. The black and white of it is the science of it. Every human life begins at fertilization. Every human life begins at fertilization, and not when some activist wishes it would. That's not philosophy, that's science. That's when life begins. But you matter too, and you should be supported. And the only words you should hear are congratulations, what can I do to help? And we as a society need to stop failing there. It's not just about legislation, it's about us as communities and even congregations of Christians saying that whatever circumstances happened, you will get compassion, you will get support, and we will walk this journey with you, because motherhood is to be celebrated and your life will not be worse off for this. Let's move to the Thelema says, I actually got the name right. So wonderful. And she pronounced my name too. Right. Thank you, Thelema. Let's move to Dylan. I want you to introduce the video we're about to watch. Just tell us a little bit about what you do. You've got Freedom Honey here, Oaks Freedom Honey, and just set up like Matt never met you before today.
No.
So who are you? Why are you doing this? And how did you come to meet the LNP member for Ford, Bert Van Manen, which we're about to see in this video?
Sure. Yeah, so Dave mentions I have honey. I'm Dylan Oakley. For those who don't know me, I'm probably I am very new to being on social media, in fact, but I'm a teacher of 23 years, and I was sharing with Matt prior that I've been barred from the classroom now because I didn't take this vaccination. And as Dave mentioned before, yeah, it's a tyrannical thing. We've lived now for 2 years under what I call politico-pharma tyranny and medical segregation. And I'm really probably just the bloke they should have left alone. I was minding my own business by and large, but I've been thrust into this really a calling, Dave, a role now to push back on what I see as a rogue government that's transgressed the boundaries that are set by God. I mean, government has a place. I'm not anti-government by any means.
Yep.
I'd prefer the government to be smaller rather than larger.
Amen.
But I see a role for government. I see a role in the scripture for government.
Yep.
But I also see that they have boundaries, and when they transgressed in this area, it was always going to be the case that I would stand up and be seen and heard. And so I haven't just been ranting at a camera or typing behind a keyboard. I've been meeting with my local state MPs. I've been talking with LNP members as well. Anybody who's in government. I actually met Dave. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but I met with the Governor General of Australia, Mr. David Hurley, and his wife Linda Hurley, and had about a 10-minute conversation with them on this issue, and really pled our cause in the area of bodily autonomy, God-given freedoms, and basic human rights in this area. It was a chance meeting. I didn't plan it, but I believe in divine providence. That meeting was arranged. Yep. And his wife gave me a hug and said, "Thank you for sharing your story." You know? So one of the things I often say on my page, which is called Freedom Has a Voice, is just keep smiling, keep telling your story to everybody. Like say the butcher, the baker, the candlestick
That
maker.
is so important.
When I was on the news, I've been on the news a few times on this too, and with Channel 7, Channel 9. And these are relationships that I built with these journalists as well, because again, I'm not here to be antagonistic. I want to build relationships. I want to give people the chance of redemption, the media included, so that we can keep getting our story out there. I was down at the local Coles, and the checkout lady there said to me, I saw you on the news, but she knew my story.
That's
already,
so cool.
because I have this conversation with her when I'm there, and she knows my story. She knows I'm a teacher. She knows my stand, and then she saw me on the news. It was just to follow up from that. So I guess Freedom Has a Voice is about, and it was right back from when this started, before I had the Facebook page. I was going around in my school saying, don't be afraid, don't hide, speak. The government at the moment are rogue. They're overstepping the mark, and we have to push back. We've got a voice. Let's use it. So long story short, Dave, look, I am without my usual career income, but I am resourceful. I've never been on the dole in my life, and I never will be. Where necessity breeds invention, and I trust God for the funds to be able to keep doing what I'm doing. But one of the things I'm doing, I am a hobby bee keeper, and I've produced honey for a few years now. And I thought, look, I'm going to slap a label on here: Oaks Freedom Honey. Freedom has a voice. Let's make it heard. And it is 100% raw, cold extracted goodness.
Wow!
It tastes like freedom, from what I've been told. So,
how much is one of those?
That's $8 for a squeezy. 500 mils. You'd pay probably a bit more than that at your local supermarket. And for the kilo tub, which I don't have with me here, is $15, and you can get a pot of Capilano honey for the same price. So priced pretty well. In saying that, I don't really have the output at the moment to keep up with the demand, so it's actually probably increasing in value as we speak, Dave. But if you do want some Oaks Freedom honey, you can message me at the page. Freedom Has a Voice, and I'll see what I can do for you. Look, at the moment, it's just a case of it's not just for me an individual thing; it's a family thing. I'm with my family in this fight, and we went to Canberra, and I could talk for quite a while here, Dave, just around the spontaneous things that have happened. But going to Canberra was like a pilgrimage that we never expected to do. It happened. We went there, and we were part of history.
Show us your shirt, because people can order that online.
Look, I'll even stand up so they can get a better view there. So this shirt, I'm really chuffed with this shirt here.
Just stay right there. Stay right there.
So it says there. I'll just suck the belly in a little bit. Freedom Has a Voice. March on National Parliament, Saturday, 12th of February, 2022. If you were there, you know you were there. You'll never forget it. You were part of history. I took the words there from Martin Luther King, march on Washington. So we did a march on National Parliament. It was peaceful. It was in the hundreds of thousands. People said millions. I'll say hundreds of thousands. And it was like nothing we've ever experienced before. And look, the people that you were amongst were everyone.
Where can people go to get one of those T-shirts to support you?
You can jump on Freedom Has a Voice Facebook page, and you'll find a link there. Or you can.
Is that facebook.com/Freedom Has a Voice?
That's the one. Or you could go to redbubble.com and you can look up Oaks Freedom Shop and go straight to Oaks Freedom Shop, and you'll find other shirts in the same theme. It's not just a new thing for me. There is a thing called holy resistance, and Matt, as a pastor, will know all through the scripture as well. There are people who have had to stand up, and it's been a resistance, but it's been holy. Whether it's been Daniel when he's told he couldn't pray, and he continued to pray and was thrown into a lion's den, or whether it was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who told they had to bow to an idol, and they knew they couldn't do that, so they resisted, and they were then thrown into a fiery furnace. Jesus is always in the fire of resistance. Jesus is always in the holy resistance. We're called to do it as Christians, and it's part of. People say, "Well, I'm not focused on the gospel, Dylan. You're focused on fighting for freedom." No, the gospel and fighting for freedom. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. Are all combined in a fight for justice, and it's God's heart. Like Matt said before, speak up for the oppressed. Speak up for those who have no voice. And I know that's what this page is about too. So many people have contacted me and said, I feel encouraged, I feel inspired, I feel for the first time in my life I can speak out about these things. I'm not alone. And that's been the message the whole way. We're not alone. There are literally millions of us in this country who have experienced coercion, incentivization, have been really trampled by rogue governments at the state level and at the federal level. And we're together. We just need to all start to speak. Let's never forget, if we all had said no and pushed back on this together as one, it would never have happened. But people folded. People folded under pressure. It exposed a lot of things, not only in our own lives and in workplaces, but in churches as well. And we as the dust settles, we've got a lot to look at and analyse and think about, and even repent, because we were kind of caught napping with this. And but we've learned a lot, and if we can be humble about it, we can move forward, and this can never happen again. And part of that, Dave, is the fight that we have right now leading up to the federal election. There is a democratic revolution underway, and
there is.
I'm excited to be part of it.
And you know what? This is two-layered. This is one of the themes I wanted to bring into the Church and State Summit at the beginning of this year. And for those people still waiting for the videos, they are this close to ready. I just need to get them out to you. I'm so sorry for the delays. But one of the themes was the political revolution is happening, and we need to be aware of what's happening. Politics has changed in Australia. We can't keep doing the same thing that we did before and expecting the same outcome.
No.
Clearly, partisan loyalty to the Liberal Party, as at least they're not Labor, is no longer a voting strategy to protect our freedom, our liberty, our justice, or even our babies' lives, Mr. Prime Minister. But there also needs to be a political revolution that we instigate, that we rise up and say, well, the wheels are turning, but we are going to turn the wheels.
Absolutely.
And so there's a direction that we need to go on. So probably in that spirit, you found yourself in Park Ridge Park recently.
I did at Carver's Reach Park. And before I go there, because I don't want to forget about this, Dave, some action steps we can all do to be part of this democratic revolution. We can't, at the moment, just think, well, I'll vote for the Liberal Party. That's what I voted for. The Labor Party. That's what I voted for. We need to be diligent. We need to get active. And the wonderful thing is I'm meeting more and more people. That's what's happening. In fact, their families are wondering, wait a minute, you've changed. You're not talking about the weather anymore. You're not talking about the rugby league ladder anymore. You're not out there trimming your rose bushes anymore. You want to get all political active all of a sudden. What's wrong with you? Calm down. And they say, well, no, I can't, because, I've been awakened, and I've been, trampled on, and here is a great cause. So right now, what we can do is we can get to know who our minor party, freedom parties are in our electorate. We can start to get to know who they are, do a bit of research, look on the webpage, get along to candidate forums that are in your area.
Yeah, very important.
Yeah, that people are funding all this so that we can go there and question and hear them. And I'm the kind of person who listens to somebody. I don't just listen to their words, but I want to know, have they got a fire in their belly? I can tell if somebody's reading something from a book or whether there's a passion in them. So figure out who your minor party candidates are that you can really trust. I'm saying unless your major party candidate, a major party sitting member has shown solidarity with Australians through this terrible dark period of the last 2 years and has been outspoken and has fought against it publicly, put them last, and then put your minor party candidates in order, your freedom party candidates in order of the ones you would like to see elected. Not only that, motivate people around you. Talk about this.
I think that demonstration of solidarity has to be more than lip service.
100%.
What does that kind of demonstration look like to you?
Well, it has to be outspoken in opportunities when it's come up in either media interviews, in Parliament itself, when there's been bills on the table with in terms of voting. I mean, there was Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party put a bill to end the mandates in the federal Parliament there, and that was a good opportunity for people to. Craig
Kelly had one as well.
Yeah, Craig Kelly. That's a good opportunity for people to speak up and stand up and be noted on the record for standing against it. It's not hard. I like to say it like this: people like myself who are fighting and in this freedom community know who our friends are, Dave, and we know those who haven't had our back, and we know those who are our enemies. It's very, very clear to us.
That's a really good question.
Yes.
Did you vote for either Craig Kelly's anti-mandate piece of legislation, or did you vote for Pauline Hanson's piece of anti-mandate legislation? And if not, why not?
Why not?
And I actually want to encourage people. They may have a good reason.
Yes.
They may have a carefully articulated reason which isn't anti-freedom. And you might not agree with their vote, but they may still, when you ask that question, have an open mind to why they might have said no. There might be a good reason with details in the legislation that they couldn't live with while they supported the spirit of the legislation.
And these are the kind of questions we can ask, and it's why I've been disappointed, Dave, in the past. If I have not every forum I've been to have given the audience or the people that are there the chance to question their political representatives about this very core issue, because we want to see whether they squirm, whether they give you a pat answer, whether it's just a script, or whether they can, exactly what you're saying, articulate the very real challenge they had with that legislation. And we need that. And I sometimes sense that this very major issue.
I agree with you.
Yes.
Campbell Newman doesn't know why I ask him about euthanasia and abortion. And the reason is because these are the questions the people who follow me are interested in.
100%.
And the greatest favor I can do you as an interviewer is give you a chance to articulate why you think differently to us, because maybe you can persuade us, maybe you can change our mind, or maybe you can just help us appreciate your position in a way that doesn't become a deal breaker, even though we don't agree with your position.
Because hiding, and anybody who's in public relations knows this, if you want to hide and censor a debate, well, then you are considered straight away to be on the other side of what.
Let's talk about this video.
One last thing, the rallies, Dave. I wanted to say this. There's another thing you can do. There are freedom rallies, particularly on the 14th of May. There are freedom rallies. It's every city, every state around Australia. And in many of these rallies, they're going to be political candidates from freedom-minded parties who you can come and listen to. In our area, where Dave and Matt and I are, there's the one on the Gold Coast at the Broadwater Parklands this Saturday at 12 p.m. And I encourage you to come on down. Don't just come by yourself. Bring 10 friends. Let's be seen in big numbers. I understand that confirmation is with One Nation. We'll have Pauline Hanson, George Christensen, Malcolm Roberts will be speaking. The other parties will have all of their candidates speaking as well. I'll be opening there in prayer and sharing a few words as well. So please come down, be seen in numbers, and it's only 1 week out. This is not only a physical thing that we need to do, there's a spiritual nature to this election coming up, and we've got to do everything we can. Moving on to the, so what happened was the other day I went down with a friend of mine, Daryl, who's also in our electorate here in the electorate of Ford, and we went down to the Carver's Reach Park because we heard that Bert Van Manen was going to be down there and meeting with his electorate. So we thought we'd go down and ask him these questions that we've been talking about now. I haven't seen the mainstream media cover this, Dave. I wouldn't need to do what I'm doing with a mobile phone and an impromptu conversation, putting him on the spot, as it were, if the media were doing their job as the free press pillar of democracy,
Yep.
So it's kind of fallen on the shoulders of citizen journalists, independent journalists. Not that I consider myself one of those. I'm just a bloke in his electorate.
Journalist?
Yeah, I'm just a bloke in his electorate who's been mistreated. Like many others. As I said.
Apologies to the few good ones.
Yeah, that's right. No, and look, journalism, as I said, it's a free press pillar of democracy. It has a place, and we're not asking for much. The people like myself who've been trampled, we're not asking for the media to be on our side or to push our case. We just want some balanced, independent reporting. We want some investigative journalism.
Truth would be novel.
Truth would be wonderful, And so, look, it's not like I find great comfort in doing what I'm doing. I'm stepping in faith. I'm walking on the water many times, but I went down to the park and I had the mobile phone rolling, doing a live stream onto Facebook. And when Bert arrived, he was a little late that morning. I invited him to have a conversation with me on a live stream. He agreed, and I put these questions to him. The feedback I've seen so far on my page is that he dodged the questions, Dave. He did what we already knew in our heart is what's going on. He pointed, well, it's not the federal government can't do it. It's got to be the state government. There seemed to be just a dodging. And that was the feedback I got on the page. If you watch the whole interview, you'll see I'm very fair. I give him ample time to answer the questions. And sometimes the unscripted, impromptu conversations are where we're going to get closer to the truth, Dave, rather than the prepared answers. So I think we should let the video maybe speak for itself somewhat. We can talk through it after that.
Roll video.
Hey, Bert. I'm doing a live stream, so say hi. Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, we just kind of did a live stream. We were waiting around for a bit since 9:30, so I think this one there's a groundswell that I'm detecting. I'm calling it a democratic revolution. It might not be what you want to hear, Bert, but there's a groundswell of discontent at the moment for the major parties. It's why people like me are doing what I'm doing. And you got any idea why that might be?
Oh, it's been a difficult 2 years for everybody, Dylan.
Do you mind if I just give you this? I want people to be able to hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Oh, it's been a difficult 2.5 years for everybody. COVID, floods, fire, a whole range of issues. So, it's understandable that people are frustrated, a bit worn out.
Yep.
And so, it's perfectly understandable.
Now, you mentioned COVID in there, and that has been something that people raise as one of the reasons that we've had a difficult time. Would you say it's COVID that's been the problem, or is it more so the government reaction to a virus?
Well, we have a responsibility to make informed decisions based on the information we get from experts, and that's exactly what we've done as a government, and I think as a federal government we've done an extraordinary job keeping our economy ticking over, support for business, keeping people employed. That's been critically important to the result of where our economy is today. We have a 4% unemployment rate. We have an economy that's going along as one of the best in the world, and I think we should be very proud of that as a country. The government's provided the supports. It's actually the Australian people have gone on and made that happen.
Bert, you mentioned the unemployment rate, and I have to ask here because you're talking to someone who's lost their job through to the government, thanks to the government reaction to this virus. I'm a teacher of 23 years, and I've been stripped of my income, my career, my livelihood because I haven't elected to have a medical intervention. Now, I understand what you say about a public health response. I would expect that of government, but I'd also expect them to get the balance right between individual freedoms, bodily autonomy, and a public health response. So I'm not alone. There are thousands of teachers, as you'd be well aware, across this state.
Family members who are teachers in that position.
You have family members who have elected to maintain their bodily sovereignty and don't have...
Well, they've made the decision not to get the vaccination.
Yeah, well, so Bert, now my problem, and I think a lot of people have this, and you may be able to clarify this for us, we're blaming the LNP for this as much as the rogue ALP state government with these mandates.
Well, Dylan, the constitutional responsibility sits with the state government, and the state government have removed a lot of the restrictions of late. So
I'm still out of work.
Well, that's a question then to ask the state government as to why they've still maintained those restrictions when they've released plenty of others. You can now go to clubs and mix freely with people.
So the state government created the
so
digital
you have
certificate,
not
which
to get
enables the
vaccinated.
enforcement of the
That
mandate.
decision rests with the state government.
Is that the Prime Minister has made it very clear he's very supportive of a mandatory vaccination across the country. I'll quote him. He said, I want to make this vaccination as mandatory as possible. I don't think he has any desire, any wish to see the states relax. And I think he's hiding behind this idea that there's a constitutional position for the states to have this, the mandates, and he can't overturn it, etc.
Well, Dylan, you would have to show me that particular quote. I'm not aware of that particular quote. Our policy as a federal government remains and hasn't changed.
How can you have not heard that? You may not have heard of that, but you voted.
You can choose to get a vaccination or not.
Now, here's one thing you could do to really make it difficult for them. Why would you not take away their access to the National Immunisation Register? That's how this is being facilitated. This cruel system of medical segregation is being facilitated by the federal government's given access to the National Immunisation Register.
Well, actually, that's not correct. They don't have access to it. You provide them access to it when you provide the links through the app, but they don't have access to it as of right.
So if I am clear that I don't want my information shared with the state government, etc., then I would be exempt from having to follow these mandates, correct?
Well, that's a discussion to have with the state government as to what exemptions they're prepared to apply.
Now, the other thing, Bert, I was going to ask then, who's in charge of the AEC, the Australian Electoral Commission? Is that a federal body?
They're a federal body.
Why then, for me to get a little bit of casual work with the AEC at this next election, would I have to have double vaccination? Because that's a requirement with the AEC. Now, that's a federal body.
You'll have to ask the leadership of the AEC, but it's not been a mandate by government.
But sure. See, this is where you can. This is where you can come in, Bert, and say, well, wait a minute, what the heck? We'll get that fixed up. That's a federal body. We don't have mandates apparently as a federal a federal government. So we'll get that fixed up, and I can get some work, and I can get a bit of pay.
I'll take that up with the relevant ministers. Ben Morton, who's the Special Minister of State.
Yeah.
That's the responsibility of the management of the AEC, and if that's what they've decided, that's where it sits at this point.
Just to be fair, Bert, I just don't want to hear politicians anymore just blaming and pointing and saying it's this, I can't do that, and I can't do this. We want can-do people in there. And that's why I believe we're going to get a balance of power in this federal government now, with minor parties.
Dylan, you want can do around certain areas, right? I've delivered a list of projects right across the spectrum. Upgrading the Mount Lindley Highway, upgrades to the M1, the exits on the M1, a range of sporting and community projects to make this community a better place.
You don't have a job, you can't use it.
So it's not that we aren't doing things, right? You've got a particular issue around some of the management of how COVID was handled, fair enough, right? That is one part of a much bigger picture and set of responsibilities we have as a government, and I'll continue to work on all of those
finishing
things.
with this.
As I said, I'm happy to raise that issue with Ben Morton and see what his response is.
I appreciate that. That'll go a long way. And Bert, I'll just say this, I'm going to finish on this. It's been a very dark 2 years. It's been, in a sense, psychological warfare. We've wondered what's going on. We've got government breathing down our neck trying to inject us with something we don't want to be injected with. Now, that's our right. Okay, so to say about the Mount Lindley Highway to me is low priority. I live here, I travel on the Mount Lindley Highway, but we're talking about, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not alone. I believe there are millions of us who say, if you didn't, Bert, stand up and show solidarity with us and get in there and at least fight back against this assault on our individual freedoms and our conscience, well, we're not interested in anything else you've got to say. But I'm going to allow the viewers to make their own assessment.
Well, Dylan, you've got your views, as do other people.
Yep. Right? And that's the beauty of a democracy, as you said.
Beauty of a democracy,
yep.
Right? I don't have to agree with them either, right?
Yep.
And there's aspects of the discussion I don't agree with, and your views I don't agree with, but there's others I do. So let's have a civil discussion. Happy to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you mind if I just video your interview? Is that okay? Excuse me for 1 sec, Darryl. Yes, my friend.
You might not video me, please. I just want to ask what you're doing here.
I'm here because I'm a citizen of this electorate,
okay.
And I'm here to talk to Bert, which I've done.
Okay.
Yeah, and
who are you recording for?
Myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Look, I can have a chat to you off camera if you like. A bit later on. Yeah. No, that's okay. I don't need to justify myself to you. I don't even know who you are. What's your name? So you don't want to be on video. What's your name?
If you turn the camera off, I'll have a chat.
No, I'm not turning it off right now, sorry.
Stop being a bully.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not being a bully. You are.
Okay, it looks like we've got a bit of an incident, but
Good on you.
Bert, is it right for this guy to shut me down? Yeah, but he said turn it off, and he said turn it off, and he started, demanding that I turned off, and who am I, and all this stuff. I don't even know who he is, to be honest. Yeah. I think. Yeah.
Politicians.
Thank you.
To show, hey, these mandates are wrong. You haven't verbalised it, or I haven't seen much written about it.
I have said that on public record.
Yeah, but are you attending rallies?
No, I'm not attending rallies.
Well,
because I've got a responsibility to attend community events here in my
what?
Rally in Brisbane.
So you're telling me that
he doesn't attend rallies because he's got to go to community events.
Freedom is not important to you.
No,
it's not about
those rallies are important for those people. My responsibility is to community events I have on here in the electorate.
If he was against the mandate,
other
be getting the place to speak
who have made other decisions.
Of course.
And so I'm going to attend local community events. I'm not going to go to a rally in Brisbane or Sydney or anywhere else that they've made.
Well, the decisions that have been made. So what's the price of a cabbage now? Any idea?
Oh, come on, mate. Don't be
silly.
I'm not. You're being silly.
No, I'm not. No, let me just. The reason I asked that question.
You're involved in the conversation, mate. Come on. It's an interview here.
It's not an interview. You asked for an interview.
And all I'm asking is,
what's the matter with you? This is the whole thing wrong with democracy, my friend. He just said it's great that we're out here doing this. Now, come on. Tell him to go and sit down. Surely.
You told me that it was an irrelevant question.
Are you conducting it?
Yeah, no.
Thanks so much, Bert, and it's appreciated. I mean, like you said before when we were both talking, this is democracy, and this is the beauty of it, that we can come out. Excuse me, so you're just in between Bert and I? Yeah. It's great that we can come out and chat like this.
Wow.
Well, there you have it. That was the abridged version, of course. So if you want to watch the whole lot and get the context and all the bits in between, jump onto Freedom Has a Voice on Facebook and you can watch the whole lot. But you can see what happened there. As I said, as much as we might have been unhappy or unsatisfied with Bert's responses to the questions that I asked him, at the very least, he took the impromptu conversation live stream there and answered the questions. But it was very much tarnished by his staffer there, who confirmed the worst fears of many Australians, that the government does not want to give a platform or a voice or hear the cries of the oppressed.
What on earth does a staffer think that an elected federal representative has to fear from a constituent with a camera?
Yeah.
Like, why do you need to protect your MP from a constituent with a camera? Like, I mean, surely transparency in government, like you said, and that was really good, asking Bert to confirm if he believes in transparency while his staffer was proving the opposite. It's like, answer the questions. It's election time. How can you not answer the questions? Where were you? What basis do you think that you refuse to participate in legislation because it's unconstitutional, but you refuse to participate in a Supreme Court case against closing borders? Have you read the Constitution? Like, come off it. You can't be weak on this. Why did your government pull out from defending the Constitution? Because you're all a bunch of windsocks blowing with the wind and no spine at all. It's utterly impotent and cowardly, and that's exactly why your staffer needed to protect you from a constituent with a camera.
Yeah, well, I mean, I believe one of the reasons they withdrew from that High Court challenge was because the politics wasn't on the side of opening the borders. Aristotle...
Zero leadership, just following from the front.
Yes. Aristotle writes something very interesting in his book Rhetoric, or as Dave would say, rhetoric.
I'm going to go with Dave on this one.
It's a bit of an in-joke that we've been having today. But in his book Rhetoric, he talks about the fact, and this is a principle we all understand really, that too much of a good thing ruins it. And he says specifically in the context, too much democracy ruins it. And what he means in that context is when people use their democracy to vote away their right to freedom, they've ruined it.
Yeah.
It's no longer democracy. You can't invert something, overuse something and still say that's what it is.
Yeah.
And that's part of what our politicians have used to justify supporting or not speaking against this wickedness which has been happening, because the polls said at certain points, I mean, that things were supported by the electorate. So what?
Yeah.
Justice is not an opinion matter.
That's right.
It's not about opinion polls. It's about what is right. And frankly, if the LNP government couldn't find a way or the reason to use their resources and access to the courts and other things to fight against these mandates more avidly, then what good are they? Why do we need them? We want politicians in place who are going to stand on principle, even when the weight of society goes against it. The Liberal Party saying, oh, we couldn't do anything. One, that's nonsense. That's absolutely nonsense. And no one buys it. Well,
right.
Sorry, very few people buy it. And the only people I know who buy it are avid, blue to the core supporters.
They're
right?
partisan. They're not objective.
Exactly.
They're not honest. They're not accurate. They're not right.
But even if they couldn't do something about it, which we don't agree and we don't support, don't believe, then avidly speak out against it publicly. Get behind your Liberal party mates who did.
Yeah.
Gerard Reddick, Senator Antic, and previously Craig Kelly, who was one of you guys. And George Christensen is another one.
Yeah.
And there's other MPs who haven't been outspoken who have crossed the floor and supported Craig Kelly's bill.
Yes.
So it's a load of tripe that Bert Van Manen couldn't vote in support of that bill, because members of his own party in his own House of Representatives did vote in support of the bill. Imagine that. I mean, the constitutionality of that bill gets decided by the High Court. You put the best politic forward that you can, and that was clearly it. If you want to improve on the bill, then you vote for amendments. But the constitutionality of it is a question for the High Court. And there was plenty of your learned colleagues who disagreed with you, Mr. Prime Minister, and Mr. Local MP, who uses it as some kind of weak dishwater excuse for squibbing your responsibilities and defending freedom. Absolutely appalling.
Well, Dave, I don't know if it showed up on that particular interview there, if that bit was in it, but when I asked it, did that show up there? I asked him about what did you vote for Pauline Hanson?
No,
it didn't show up for some reason. So, but that's on there if you want to go back and have a look, because I specifically asked him, did you vote for Pauline Hanson's bill to get rid of these mandates? And he said no, and I asked him why, and he said because it wasn't constitutionally valid from what he'd heard. And I said, well, why couldn't we have just fixed that up? And I didn't mean obviously change the constitution, which he assumed I meant, but I meant why don't we make the bill constitutionally valid and get it across the line, do everything we can, at least be seen to be trying to do that, or as you say, let it be changed in the court system in the interests.
And that's exactly how this works.
Yeah.
That's exactly how this works, Dylan, is the government, if they had a will,
yes,
certainly could put forward a bill that they believed was unconstitutional,
yes,
and affect the right outcome,
yes,
until
yeah,
the bill was challenged and make the states take you to court,
yes,
and prove it wrong.
Yeah.
And that would be a process that would take at least weeks, if not months, and it would send strong signals to the whole of the nation that you are on the side of freedom and justice and morality and against the abuse of government by the states.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that it would have sucked all of the oxygen out of this whole, what I'm calling the democratic revolution, and this influx of the minor parties for freedom. It would have sucked because we would have seen, well, the LNP at least have their back. They're trying to do something. And I said on that, at that point there, I said, look, as far as a man on the street goes, we hear all these words and whatever. At the end of the day, what we're seeing is a government led by Scott Morrison giving money to the Ukraine, involved in a war overseas, and they can't even help the people who are suffering here. Gerard Rennick has done a great job in showing the amount of people who are now suffering from damage from this injection.
Yep.
So there's that aspect going on. Then there's also the aspect of people out of work and suffering, the flow-on effects for families. I'm a family man. I've got 4 children still at home in my care. This is put a big dent in my ability to generate income for my family, and so these are the flow-on effects. It's a psychological. I mean, even for young people going through the last 2 years, I being in the school before I was let go, I saw young people, their hope, their visions for the future, all being evaporated and eroded. And it is a criminal thing that's happened to us. And and I expected that my politicians, people who I'm going to vote for at this election, are the people who spoke up. And this whole idea, in hindsight, we've got 2020. Now, it didn't take me too long to figure out something was going wrong and to start speaking out about it. It doesn't take till now that we start to do it. This brings up as well, Dave, compensation issues. I think that, and I said it in there as well, federal government would go a long way in actually being the one to start the conversation around compensation. I'm interested to see what compensation I'll be getting as a teacher who's lost career opportunities, lost income.
I hope you do.
Yeah, we need restitution, we need compensation, we need an investigation, then we need restoration. There's a whole series of steps our nation needs to follow now to get things back.
Yep.
And to make sure this never, ever, ever, ever happens again.
Yep. Any final thoughts?
I think it's laughable that the LNP are arguing that there's nothing they could have done. I think it's hilarious, and I think they're going to have a wake-up call on election day. There was something else I wanted to say, but at the end of the day, wickedness has happened, absolute wickedness, and many people are silent. And don't you guys think it's disturbing? And maybe and to be honest, I do have to say here, I don't watch a lot of news. I generally tend to read it if I am engaging with it. So maybe it's happening more than I'm aware of. But don't you guys think it's disturbing how this is almost not an issue in the election?
Oh, well, that's by design.
The management of the country in the last 2 years, in the narrative, in the official media narrative, there's radio silence on this issue. Why, as you said before, why hasn't Bert been asked this by Channel 7, Channel 9? Why didn't you do more? There's absolute radio silence. And that's because the design of the narrative is to focus on directing us where they want us to look and what they want us to be focused on. And they don't want us to be focused on this because they know it was wrong. Everyone knows it was wrong. To coerce people, to threaten people, to bully people, to tell people, it's going to be as mandatory as possible, to tell people you're not going to be able to work. I mean, people getting up and saying your life will be made difficult. We're going to make it hard for you. Stuff like that was said. People were bullied. People were threatened. And cowardly Christians out there are staying silent when they should be speaking out against this because they know it was wrong. Something very important that I wanted to say before. You asked, is this a gospel issue?
Yes.
One of the things that I've heard consistently throughout this time is we need to be focused on the gospel. Absolutely. I agree with that. I preach the gospel every week. It's part of my preaching. I go out and share the gospel. I do evangelism. I love the gospel because it is the power of God to salvation for all. And Paul says this in 1 Corinthians. He says this, well, do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own. You were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. In other words, the gospel goes to the core of who's sovereign over our bodies and who has authority over it. And let me ask this question, very simple. Is it Caesar who has authority over our bodies? Is it the government or is it the Lord?
Yeah.
The Lord bought them with a price. The gospel goes to the heart of the sovereignty of our bodies. It is not the government's job to tell us what to do with them. And you know what?
Right.
This was so powerful in the past. This was the kind of teaching which undermined slavery. The Romans could do what they wanted to the bodies of slaves, but Christian teachings like this undermine that. Christian teachings that our bodies are stamped with the authority of God. Many people have said in this time, we have to obey the government. Jesus said, what did he say? Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto the Lord what is the Lord's. Let me ask this question. If I hold a $5 note up, whose image is on that? It's the Queen or some other person's image, which is symbolic of our government. But whose image is stamped on every human body?
God's image.
The image of God. Exactly correct. So the state does not have the authority to override that.
Absolutely.
And Christians need to be teaching this because it was Christians in the taught who taught the pagan Romans this, which undermined the pagan Roman idea that they could do whatever they want to somebody else's body because they had the power.
Yeah.
Matt,
final thoughts from you, Dylan?
well, Matthew, I'm going to grab what you just said there. I'm going to package it and put it on my page. It was excellent. And as soon as you started saying it, I have had this direct conversation. Get this. I've had this direct conversation with my Labor MP, my state Labor MP. I looked at him in the eyes and I said to him, my body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. I am bought with a price, the precious blood of Jesus Christ. And it is God who has given me autonomy over my body under Christ, and that is not your authority as government. It's not authority of a corporation or a business. So it's like, this is the Spirit of God that is in us and that is coming to. So these are times I believe that it's even right to be prophetic with our politicians and with the media and other, and not to just bring argument per se, but bring the prophetic truth, absolute truth around these issues of bodily sovereignty and the fact that, yes, we are made in the image of God. So I'm going to grab what you said there because you and put it on my page. One of the other things in terms, Dave, of talking about prophetic things in relation to the church, and it's such a refreshment to see someone like Matt as a pastor who's leading the way in this. But it's been, I've seen some prophetic parallels. One is Nicodemus, who came and saw Jesus at night because he didn't want to be seen publicly with him, and Matt's also confirmed this. But there are people who will privately give you support in what you're doing and standing up against the government in these areas, but publicly they will not associate with you. That is a decision that many Christian leaders have made, and there's a verse which I think is challenging to them right now, and it's this, and it's from the book of John. If you just give me 1 sec, I've got it here screenshotted.
While you're looking for that, yes. Salima says, put the majors last on your ballot, number every box, control your own vote. That's an incredibly wise thing to do. Make sure you number every box. Guys, let me emphasize, especially, I mean, you have to on the lower house green ballot, but on the white ballot paper, make sure you number every box. I know it's hard. Other people have laid down their lives for our freedom. I'm sure you can lay down an hour. If you make a mistake, go get a fresh one. They will gladly give it to you. You can start again. Get it right. Put the effort in. It's worth the effort because only that way, numbering every box, will you guarantee to exclude the Greens from the Senate, let alone put the freedom voters in.
Absolutely. There's a time where they're talking about Jesus, the Pharisees, and they say, if we let him alone like this, all will believe in him. This is from the book of John, chapter 11, verse 48. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. So it came to me that there is sometimes a concern, a fear that our place, and in our modern churches at the moment, there is a place in relation with the government and funding and all of this, that they are concerned. If we speak up and we step out and we push back on what is injustice and tyranny, then we might lose our place.
Yeah, we will. People will not want to be associated with us because we speak out on issues that are not the flavor of the day to speak out against. I mean, who cares about that? I want to be able to look back on the way that I spoke out on this issue in 10 years' time and be able to hold my head high and say, I didn't hide from speaking the truth because I was afraid.
Yeah.
And look, I understand why people are afraid to speak out on this, because if you speak out against mandates, you get, as I remember one minister from one state government said, if you give hope or quarter to anyone who's against these mandates, then you're an anti-vaxxer, even if you've been vaccinated. So a vaccinated person is now an unvaccinated person because they spoke out against coercive mandates. That's insanity, but it's powerful rhetoric, because there's nothing that an Australian wants to be known as of less than an anti-vaxxer. Well, but the truth is, and then you can jump in. The truth is, at the end of the day, who cares? Bear the reproach.
Yes, right.
Bear the reproach.
Yes.
It's worth bearing reproach for the truth.
Yeah.
Even if people who are close to you turn on you, God is watching.
Yeah.
And look, I understand Christians disagree on some of these issues, but most I know agree that the mandates are wrong.
Yep.
But most won't say it.
Yep. Yeah, well, I was going. It's amazing how just words will make people put their heads back down. You know what we call an anti-vaxxer, and another one.
Labels.
It's another one that's used very effectively as conspiracy theorist, and we've seen that. And I know that there are wacky conspiracies. Don't get me wrong, but that term has been used to shut down debate for many years. And the interesting, if you look at the origin of the term conspiracy theorist, it was first used by the CIA around the time of JFK's assassination. To stop speculation that there could have been more than one shooter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Now, if we look back on that event, there are very few who just believe the official narrative of what happened around John F. Kennedy. But that label has been used to shut down incorrectly. I mean, I was in staff rooms at the high school where if you talk about, well, what if the virus came out of a lab, and conspiracy theorist. So anything that challenges the narrative now is a conspiracy theory. Often they end up turning out to be not so far off the mark. After all.
Yeah, that's right. The difference between a conspiracy theory and a conspiracy is about a month.
That's a month.
That's correct. I want to finish with this quote from a really, really fantastic Christian activist by the name of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he said this: "The church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. It must be the guide and the critic of the state, and never its tool. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it will become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. If the church does not participate actively in the struggle for peace and for justice, it will forfeit the loyalty of millions and cause men everywhere to say that it has atrophied its will. But if the church will free itself from the shackles of a deadening status quo and recover its great historic mission, will speak and act fearlessly and insistently in terms of justice and peace, it will enkindle the imagination of mankind and fire the souls of men, imbuing them with a glowing and ardent love for truth, justice, and peace. Men far and near will know the church as a great fellowship of love that provides light and bread for lonely travelers at midnight." And amen, Reverend King. That's exactly what we need to do right now. Both as patriots and as Christians, we need to recapture the prophetic zeal to be able to declare truth, justice, and peace as the conscience of the state. No, we don't believe in what some radical secularists call a theocracy, where the people that rule the church rule the nation. But we do believe in the very necessary integration of people of good character and conscience in politics, in that voice to guide and be the conscience, saying here's right, here's wrong, and we do so for the love of our nation and for the love of our neighbour. And because of that, the church will not be less popular by refusing the status quo. We will be more popular by refusing the deadening status quo. That's pretty much it for this episode of Pellowe Talk today. We're part of the Good Source platform, and you can become a Good Source supporter to help us produce more shows like this. This particular panel conversation we've done today is something I want to do more of, probably Monday mornings, maybe Tuesday mornings, for months yet to come, sometimes with different panelists. So let us know who you love, who you want more of. Damien Curry is also expressed interest. Alexandra Marshall will be coming back. And we've got other, random things planning to happen. And we might just film this on a Monday morning, edit it quickly and get it up Monday night. But this is something that we basically can't do without your support. This is a full-time enterprise. And I'm grateful that you're making your money in a flexible way at the moment. And you can be here. And obviously, Matt, as part of your ministry, joining us today as well, separating that time. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming. And thank you to the Good Source supporters who put their hand in their pocket for $10 or $20 or $50 or $100, as is the case in some cases, every week or every month, just to help us do this. This is necessary, guys. Some sacrifice and some investment is necessary if we're ever going to dilute the power of the lying harlot media to influence elections in this nation. We need the truth out there, and we need to basically be investing in that, because it's not going to be subsidized by the government to the tune of $1.3 billion per year. Thank you for your support, and make sure you go to the website, goodsource.news, to look at past episodes, recent articles, podcasts and videos by lots of independent contributors. And agreement isn't necessary, but we do need to focus on the pursuit of truth together. And when we do that, putting aside our egos, that's when we can probably get a more beautiful politic in Australia, free of this kind of tyranny that we've seen. Thank you very much for your time, and we will see you in the next episode.
Today, we need a special kind of courage. Not the kind needed in battle, but a kind which makes us stand up for everything that we know is right, everything that is true and honest. We need the kind of courage that can withstand the subtle corruption of the cynics, so that we can show the world that we are not afraid of the future.